Hey guys, welcome back. Let's install the Tingle Tensioning System. A big shout out to David Tingle, the man behind the idea, and Bulkman for this simple kit. Loosen off your coupler on your Y-axis motor, 2 outer M3 screws and then 2 set screws. Then remove all 4 motor screws. We will be reusing the spacers, however longer screws are provided in the kit. Now loosen the screw on the lock collar at the rear of the machine. And the same at the front of the machine. To make things easier, we will loosen the Delrin nut blocks. Don't remove them, but a half turn should be fine. If you're installing longer lead screws, which means you have the V1 kit, go ahead and unscrew yours now. If not, skip over removing and reinstalling this and continue with the following steps. Make sure to remove all the hardware from the lead screw as you unwind it so that you don't lose any. You will be reusing these. Okay, slide your new lead screw in, installing the first set of hardware. First is bearing, washer, then lock collar. Then feed this through the Delrin nut blocks. This should screw in easily. If there is binding, remove and inspect. Now before you get through the other end, install the hardware in reverse. Lock collar first, washer, and then bearing. Now screw it the rest of the way. Once we are through the other side, we're going to install our thrust bearings. First install one of your thrust bearing raceway washers, making sure the raceway is facing the bearing. Then your bearings, then your last washer, facing the other way. Lastly, another locking collar. You want to have about 11 millimeters of stick out from the locking collar for the coupler to clamp on. Once you have confirmed that, tighten down the lock collar. Now we can repeat the process at the front of the machine. Washer, bearing, washer, and then the locking collar. This time we're going to leave it loose. Pro tip, at the back of the machine use a hex wrench in the locking collar to stop the lead screw from rotating while you tension. Back to the front of the machine, now we'll grab our tensioning tool and thread it onto the lead screw. Slowly tightening the tensioning tool against the lock collar, this will put tension on the lead screw. You don't need to go too tight here, we just need a little bit of tension. Once you have done this, tighten the lock collar and remove your tensioning tool. Now we can check that our bearings are still seated and slide our lock collars up and tighten them. No pressure is required here like before, as we only use these to retain the bearings. Repeat the same steps at the back of the machine. And we can reinstall our motors. First, slide your coupler onto the lead screw. We won't tighten this yet. Now we'll be using the provided 55mm screws here, as well as the 6mm spacers, plus the original 40mm spacers. Once your motor is mounted, we can move over to the coupler. Center the coupler over the motor shaft and the lead screw. There should be a gap between the coupler and the motor, also between the coupler and the lock collar. Locate the flat spot on your motor shaft and tighten the set screw against it first. Then tighten the set screw against the lead screw. Once these are done, rotate the coupler and tighten the outer M3. Lastly, we need to tighten our Delrin nut blocks. These simply need to be tightened in place and straight. You do not need to pull against these, as some people seem to think. The exception to this is if yours are badly worn, in which case you need to replace them. Go ahead and repeat the exact same steps on the other side of the Y-axis, then move on to your axis. The process is almost identical here, so we'll run through this quickly. Loosen the coupler. Remove the motor screws. If your end stop's in the way like mine, remove that now. Loosen your locking collar. Same again at the other end. And if you're installing longer lead screws, unscrew the lead screw, catching the hardware as it falls. If you need to, you can loosen your Delrin nut blocks here as well. Feed through your lead screw, bearing, washer, locking collar. Slide it to your Delrin nut blocks and screw it all the way through. Just before you reach the other side, we're going to go locking collar, washer, bearing. Once we screw it the rest of the way through, we're going to go thrust bearing and then locking collar. Check for your 11mm stick out. Then tighten your locking collar. Back to the other side, thrust bearing, then locking collar. Screw on your tensioning tool, apply tension to the lead screw, and then tighten your locking collar. Now remove your tensioning tool. Check that your bearings are still seated and tighten your inner lock collar. Repeat the process on the other side. Reinstall your motors with the longer screws provided and the extra spacers, making sure to put your coupler on first. Now tighten down your coupler, first the set screw on the flat part of the motor, then the set screw on the lead screw, and then the outer M3s. Lastly, retighten the screws to your Delta nut blocks, making sure that they're straight. Once this is all complete, you are ready to go. Test your machine out and make sure you don't have any binding or loud noises from your thrust bearings. If you do, it's possible you have gone a bit too tight on your tensioning tool. You can loosen up your lock collars at one end and re-tension quite easily. Thanks again guys, and thank you to Bulkman for sending me this kit to provide you all with an installation video.